This is called Knowers or Believers. Who will win the day? I guess the spirit of conflict always shows up in anything I do. So I do believe there is a contest going on at this time. And I think the big issue is about making a transition from the age of faith and belief and obedience, the age of Pisces, into the age of knowledge and experience, which is the age of Aquarius. I think there is a great difference between knowledge and faith, or knowledge and belief, but they do overlap. There's even a difference between belief and faith, but for practical purposes, they pretty well stay the same. What does it mean to know? So this is a subject which has exercised epistemologists for hundreds of years, on those who study the nature of knowledge. So here are maybe a few thoughts about what it means to know. So all that we register or are capable of registering are contents of consciousness. Now, that's like a very first premise. There is nothing in this whole universe which is not a content of consciousness, either of your own or of some greater being with a greater sphere of sentiency. So the content of consciousness of the universal logos is everything within this cosmos. So if you would say, well, things have an independent existence. I don't really believe they do. I do go with the philosophers that say that to be is to be perceived. If a thing were not perceived, it would not be. And of course we say, well, things are and we don't perceive them, but I'm saying that some sentiency or consciousness on a very large level is perceiving that thing because it's simply a part of itself. So everything that we register in our consciousness is really a content of consciousness, either our own or of greater spheres of beings who have an increasingly large consciousness. So I would say that knowing requires several things. To be brought into conscious contact with a content of consciousness. And further, knowing. To be capable to know, to be capable of consistently and repeatedly perceiving with accuracy the exact effect which any other content of consciousness has upon the content of consciousness to be known, and the exact effect which the content of consciousness which is to be known has upon any other content of consciousness. Right. Okay. So it's a question of seeing the mutual interplay of those units within our sphere of consciousness upon which we are focusing, and to perceive that interplay with accuracy. Thus, knowing, to be capable of consistently and repeatedly perceiving with exactitude the field of internal relations of any content of consciousness, and also its external relations. It's an act of observation, it's an act of perception, and at least this is external knowing. Ultimately, if we want to talk about internal knowing, ultimately the apex of this, the acme of this, ultimately to know any content of consciousness is to identify as that content of consciousness. Meaning, it's not something else. Not only are you unified with what you want to know, which is the stage of contemplation, a stage of unity of consciousness, but you are the very thing you are perceiving. And finally, you get that state that Franklin Merrill Wolff talks about, which is the philosophy of consciousness without an object. All objects turn out to be subjects in the last analysis, and that's real knowing. So the ultimate knowing is identification. It begins externally, as I have begun to explain, with accurate perception. It goes towards unification, and finally becomes identification, and that is knowing. Now that's what we're trying to head into during this Aquarian age, because so far we don't know too much, okay? We really don't. We're surprisingly ignorant, and we do live in the cave, as we are told. Now, what does it mean to believe? And what is it that makes one a believer and not a knower? And I would say again, using my rather laborious language, because I do want to emphasize the idea that any object is really a content of consciousness. Some people think about the independence of the object as if it has what, self-existence, its own nature. But that object is really a content in your own consciousness or some other greater consciousness, which by perceiving itself creates the object. In other words, if God didn't perceive itself, there would be no objects. So every object and every item, every discrete unit of perception is really a perception by God of itself. And by God, I mean whatever I mean. Okay. So, what does it mean to believe? And what is it that makes one a believer and not a knower? I would say to be brought into conscious contact with a symbol or facsimile of a specific content of consciousness and not with the content of consciousness itself. So believing is very mediated, you might say. We don't actually come into direct contact with that which we can know. We only come into contact with a representation of that which is to be known. Like I'm talking about the one about whom naught may be said, right? Which I shouldn't do anyway. Okay, so here's the one about whom naught may be said, and what do I have? I don't have the one about whom naught may be said. I have the words, one about whom naught may be said, which is a facsimile, a symbol, or a representation of this what, you know. And this what is even a minor what compared to all the possible whats. So to believe is to regard that symbol or facsimile of a specific content of consciousness as if it were the direct and accurate perception of that content of consciousness itself. So, you know, in other words, some people read a Bible, they read a symbol, whatever it is, they don't care if they ever come in direct contact with the thing in itself. They have the symbol, and for them, the symbol is as good as the reality. And that's not good enough for us, okay? The symbol is good, but it's got to point towards the reality. So some people, you know, clutching their Bibles or whatever they clutch, you know, this symbol is everything. And they even, you know, forget not God who dwells behind the illusion. I mean, it's in the sixth ray thing, you know, dwells behind the vision. They see the vision, the vision, the vision. Okay, then they forget that it's only a vision and it's limited. And that vision is not the real thing. And further, the last thing on belief. To treat the symbol or facsimile or vision of a specific content of consciousness as if it were equal in value to direct and accurate perception of the specific content of consciousness itself, its relations, its effects, and its causes. So, you know, we stop short at the real thing. We don't care anymore. If we've got the Bible, if we've got the Quran, if we've got whatever, it's good enough. We don't have to go further and know God or reality directly. And that's superficial, isn't it? And we're not going to be satisfied with superficiality, are we? Okay, so those are kind of some preliminary definitions. Cumbersome, I admit, but anyway, you know, you get the way I'm thinking about this. Perhaps every consciousness, and I call us a kind of a POBC, you know, a point of being consciousness. That's what we are. I call us that, a point of being consciousness. Perhaps every consciousness, or point of being consciousness, sees through a glass darkly, you know, to use the words of St. Paul, when thinking towards or imagining towards that which lies beyond the presently operative blinding veil. We are all veiled, you know, it may be an electrical field or whatever, but, you know, we are protected, you know, by the angel with the flaming sword from the next more intense perception which could undo us entirely. So perhaps all of us see as if through a glass darkly because we have an operative blinding veil here, and we don't see beyond what I call the next ring past knot of sentiency when we think into the unknown. So we're all seeing, you know, darkly. We don't see the real thing, and we have many veils and ring past knots and many unknowns. But, and this is the bad part, you see, when you're faced with this, to fall back on dogma or belief, you know, raw belief, which is almost like what do they call it, blind belief. It's not a rational belief based on inference. To fall back on blind belief at this point without pressing ahead toward the lifting of the veils and towards the widening of the sphere of sentiency, which just means to touch, to be sentient, is retrogressive. Retrogressive with respect to the next level of consciousness, the next degree of sentiency which humanity can achieve. Right now we're on the brink of new consciousness, new sentiency, new touching, new unveiling. Now what are we going to do? Get scared and fall back into something that we find comfortable and secure because we believe it and we just have given up on even knowing it. We don't even care. So I would say that in good faith, people, and I put that in quotes, in good faith, people, at least sincerity, people tend to revert to what they believe. It is their only security. The attempt to achieve psychological security is the issue, and fear is the problem. Psychological security and fear and belief and the limited mind, the limited consciousness, these all go together. So from the stanza, we've been pulling out a lot these stanzas of the Blessed One along the fifth ray line. They're just terrific. And but we've been reading mostly the later part of it. Now in the beginning part, it's very interesting. From the stanza of the Blessed One for the fifth ray monad, and there are such, he even talks about them. He calls them fifth-ray people. And he calls monads people. Can you believe that? And he says they actually go onto the second path, many of them, the path of magnetic work onto the cosmic astral plane, where they kind of clean up our astral plane, with the fifth ray. Very interesting. But anyway, we learn the origin of this problem. Here it goes. The Blessed One came forth in ignorance. He wandered in a darkness deep of spirit. He saw no reason for this way of life. He sought among the many threads that weave the outer garment of the Lord, and found the many ways there be, leading to the center of the web eternal. The forms that weave that web hide the divine reality. He lost himself. Fear entered in. He lost himself. Fear entered in. And in the presently benighted state of so much humanity, the blind unit is lost, the mass consciousness is operative, and fear emerges because of this sense of not knowing who one is, where one's going, feeling impermanent, vulnerable, and all the rest. Fear enters in. Okay, so this is a problem. This primary fear that enters in, however many layers you may want to remove from it, is primarily an existential fear. And I think it is a fear of the annihilation of that which the perceiving consciousness perceives itself to be. In other words, I think I'm something, this is what I am, and I'm going to get wiped out, and that's it. In other words, it is a fear of the loss of all, of everything, fear of the loss of everything, including the self-evident fact of being, fear of non-being. We think we are, and we're afraid that we're not going to be, and that's the primary existential fear. So this is, being which does not yet, that's it, being, which we are, which does not yet identify as the essence of being, fears its own annihilation. And I think whatever fears you've got, you can all lay them on that primary fear of annihilation and of not being. Religions do take care of this, don't they? They tell you something and you feel happy about it. Okay. So, but this is not tolerable. This is not a sustainable state of consciousness. So as an antidote, or temporarily an antidote, something must be believed in order to drive this fear from the center stage of consciousness. The beliefs, and I'm talking about the average level of consciousness. I'm not talking about, enlightened Buddhists and esotericists and people who really are tuning in on what reality is all about. I'm talking about the average stage of consciousness, which we've all been through at some point and have worked our way forward from, to our particular present stage of ignorance, which we uphold until we get something better. Okay, so the beliefs to which human beings most cling are those beliefs which neutralize the fear of annihilation and which give a seeming permanence to that which the perceiving point of being consciousness thinks itself to be. That's called ego, lower E. I think I'm this, I am that, you know. This little thing here, I am that. And that gives me a certain sense of security, and if I can make that thing permanent, you know, as maybe a harp playing resident in a permanent heaven up above the clouds, then everything's all taken care of, no problem, forever. All right. Could get a little boring, couldn't it? All right, so those are the fears we cling to the most, the beliefs. The ones that neutralize the fear of annihilation. Believe in Jesus, you're going to live forever. Do the right thing, you'll go to paradise, whatever, and you'll be there forever, in a state of form, somewhere on the higher astral plane, forever. Wow. Doesn't that sound appealing? Okay, but no matter how much such believers assert a comforting belief, something within them knows that they do not know. And this subliminal knowledge of not knowing is accompanied by a creeping fear that makes them redouble their emphasis upon the asserted belief. In other words, when I've got this, you know, something in me knows that I don't really know, so I emphasize it all the more. And you've seen that all the time, operating in people, haven't you? So we have to remember that one of the descriptions of the sixth ray is the ray of undue emphasis. Hit it all the harder if you're unsure of it. Okay, so one should be aware of the beliefs which substitute for knowledge, and not seek to reinforce them overly much as if they were ramparts of a fortress. Well, we all have this kind of fortress, a fortress erected to protect oneself from existential insecurity and fear, the ramparts of our particular belief system, which one day we're going to have to throw away. Even D.K. said, you know, I forget exactly how he said it, but I've written down a lot of words, he said, and I've captured a lot of Davic lives in all of these words, and one day I'm going to have to let them go. I'm going to have to destroy all this and just release them. So whatever we build, even a temple, becomes our prison before long, and all temples must be destroyed eventually after they've served their purpose, and the universe itself is a great temple, and it must be destroyed after it serves its purpose, only to reappear again. Okay, but of course it takes some experience as a human being and with consciousness in order to avoid this tendency. So the people that are newer to it, they're not going to avoid the tendency. They're going to fall into the trap. So as we realize the gravity of the problem of faith without the experience of knowledge, we are left with many questions. The gravity, the problem of faith without experience of knowledge. We are left with a question, many questions really. What actually can be known? And is the knowing worth the effort? What actually can be known? So for many reasons, lack of confidence and laziness among them, we human beings often put artificial restraints upon our answer to that question, what can be known? This is an attitude dangerous to our spirituality and evolutionary progress. In other words, oh, that you can't know that, you can't know that, you can't know that. You know, this is what I call restraints. In time and space and relatively, it may be correct, we can't know that yet. But once the time problem is solved, we can know. And that's, and you know, the kind of restraints that many people put upon knowing are just ridiculous, they're childish. You know, we know that because we're in the esoteric field, and DK has given us these books and the, you know, HPBs and Agni Yoga. Look at what can be known. It's incredible compared to what most people think can be known. So many of us, for whom the mind is not sufficiently awakened, cannot conceive of the virtually limitless extension of that of which we are capable, and so seek to reinforce the apparently safe tininess of that which we think we are but are not. You're just this, you're a newly created soul, you're only that, you believe this way, believe that way, you'll go to heaven, you'll go to hell, and that's what you are and that's that. Okay, you know, we're tired of that, obviously. We have lived through that, and this confining of the identity of the human being to a little form-encapsulated unit of consciousness which has an eternal fate through an emotional decision is not acceptable anymore. The problem with believers per se, and I'm talking particularly of the blind believer and the blind fearful believer, is that they lack the penetrative revelatory power of the mind. So here we get onto the fifth ray theme. The penetrative revelatory power of the mind, and do not even believe in the penetrative revelatory power of the mind. So we're dealing here with the sixth and fifth ray. We're dealing with the cleavage between the astral body and the mental body. And we're dealing with people who are going to tell you, well, the mind will never get you to heaven or whatever. The mind will not bring you into any state of satisfaction. And we know that the mind can be the revealer of the real. But what level of mind, of course? Not just the concrete mind. We've talked about the different levels of mind. Different levels of mind, such as the Buddha mind, they can really bring you into something that's a whole lot more real than anything most of us deal with. So, in fact, these people, let's say, these people who are just ourselves in an earlier stage of evolution, make the endless pursuit of new knowledge, new revelation, a sin. It is forbidden. It is forbidden to know too much. Somewhere, did DK talk about it? Did someone talk about, I'm going to paraphrase here, the Catholic Church's love affair with ignorance? Something like that. You know, to keep on promoting ignorance somehow, because then the people are easier to control and so forth. And they're not alone, obviously. Right, okay. So it is a sin. It is a sin to know too much. Well, you got kicked out of the garden, didn't you, from knowing too much? You discovered that you were actually an individual, and that wasn't too good because it ended the primitive participation mystique when everything was happy, and it caused a lot of trouble to know too much. So the pursuit of the knowledge of realities is seen as a threat to the established dogma. And the church, I'll just deal with the church now, it hunted down a lot of true seekers after truth under Masonic, alchemical, medical. There were all kinds of ways of seeking truth which were not especially sanctioned by the church, and it hunted them down, right? Because it was a threat to the dogma. And we can see this shaping up also in the world of Islam as well, and any other, you know, you just go into fundamentalist anything, and you can see it shaping up. They've got to protect their narrow formulations of the truth against the penetrative power of the mind to reveal more. So imagine thinking that all that can be revealed of God or divine reality has already been revealed. For once and for all, finally. And you know there are people who really do believe that today. Oh, our teacher, he was after Jesus, so that's the final word. Oh no, Jesus is the final revelation. Oh no, someone else is, you know, final revelation. You read the reappearance of the Christ, and what DK says is the continuity of real revelation is a major principle for the New World religion. So it gives a little humility, doesn't it? We're up against this idea, this terror that there may be more than the tiny mind can grasp, and it threatens the security of everyone that's believing along those lines. So naturally, people who search for the light will be hunted down at a certain point if that other power gets too strong. So these blind believers, far from the knowledge of that which they believe, dichotomize, okay? They split, the mind splits. They assert that many things related to inner or higher states can be known only and forever by God and never by man. See, we have a huge dichotomy. Man is here, God is there. What man can know is this, what God can know is that. There's no bridging in between, and God forbid you should say, I am God, you know. That'll get you. You're just desserts, you know. Some of us know that. So anyway, only God knows these things, and that's forever. Well, who's God? You know, so we start on that whole thing. This is, for humanity, very depotentizing, if I can say that. It is the very reason why Master M said, and I'm going to paraphrase, but you'll get the idea, imitate, do not worship. Imitate, do not worship. He gave the story of Thomas à Kempis writing The Imitation of Christ, and he said a bold voice came forth from the musty monasteries and said, imitate the Christ, don't worship him. Because you know, when you imitate, you can become like the one you imitate. When you worship, the cleavage between the worshiper and that which is worshipped remains forever, and you are depotentized. You can never reach that high state. But we know, you know, our teaching teaches us that we are the one reality itself, in a minuscule form, but still the one reality. That's a terrifying thought to many people, and we're going to run right into that. If the ageless wisdom is attacked at all, and I think, as DK said, it could be, he did say so, it will, because we claim to be the one reality itself, which is God. We claim that, and that's just a terrible heresy in the eyes of many, even though the real heresy is the opposite thing. So as Master DK says, about so many of the sixth ray and third ray types, throw in a little bit of the fifth ray in there too, he says they are deficient in psychology. But he says this specifically about the third ray types and the sixth ray types. They are not good psychologists unless something else is helping. However, the real fifth ray, the higher method of teaching truth to humanity for those who are upon the fifth ray, is esoteric psychology itself, the science of the soul. So, it's that kind of science with the fifth ray and Pisces and all that, we look forward to the revelation of that, some of the study of the egoic lotus and its petals and all of that. That tells us something about the science of the soul. The fifth ray can help in this situation of non-psychological man. That's what we've got. We've got very poor psychologists who are busy projecting everything that's going on inside themselves, unknown to them, on everybody else and thinking it's happening out there. So you have to, what do they say in psychology? You have to reappropriate your projections and bring them back into your own realization as coming from within your own consciousness. So blind believers with little or no experience with knowledge of the inner or higher things impose their own limitations upon those who have no such limitations. We see that. It's happening right now, Be as small as I am. I insist that you be as small as I am. That's going on all over the place. And they seek to reinforce those limitations because they believe they are incapable of being less limited, and even more importantly, do not want to be less limited. And we're supposed to fit into that tiny little box that they, I'm projecting now, that they want to force us into. I mean, I'm that too, I know I've been there. That's why I know it so well. So this is very dangerous. It compromises the spirit of man in the large sense, manus, the great human kingdom, and thwarts its expression. Belief, of course, is important. It's very important. We believe a lot. When we read Master DK and, all these wonderful things, we believe plenty, but we call it a kind of an enlightened, inferential, reasoned belief. It's a different thing. Belief can be a prelude to knowledge. It can be an orientation towards that which can be known. So faith is interesting here. It's a type of rightly oriented belief, resonantly attuned with the knowable. Faith is a kind of rightly oriented belief, resonantly attuned with the unknown knowable, we might say. So faith, as St. Paul said, he delivered it to us, it's the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things unseen. So belief is good. And DK says, I'm giving you all this, treat it as a hypothesis. You can't possibly know it, but you can believe it enough or believe in the possibility of it being true to call it a hypothesis, and he wants us to proceed in that way, and we do. And many of us even go further. We probably do actually believe what he says. I mean, how many here actually maybe believe what DK says? Or are you treating everything as a hypothesis only? I suspect that there should be a few more hands raised than were. But anyway, excuse me. Okay, so anyway, summing it up here, there are two kinds of belief or faith as commonly used. These terms are rather congruent. There is a progressive faith or belief supported by reasonable inference, and this faith or belief leads slowly and surely to knowledge, to direct actual contact, accurate perception, unification, and identification. And then there's the other kind, the faith or belief which is rigid, in rigid forms, faith or belief in rigid forms which are supposed never to change. And note, I said forms, I didn't say rigid principles, I said forms. And forms always change. We know that. So if you have faith in a rigid form, thinking it to be invariant, never changing, then this faith is misguided. So let us not celebrate the limitations of our minds by calling ourselves the faithful. You know, in the community of faith, the faithful, all the rest of it. I mean, there are good uses of that term too, but we are the faithful and we believe in a certain way and we say this creed and so forth, but let's not celebrate that because that's really a limitation of mind. Schooled as we are in esotericism, and on the basis of the experience, some of our experiences with subtle reality, I think, which we have had, let us proceed on the following hypothesis. Let us proceed on a different hypothesis, which may seem radical to those who seek in blind belief an illegitimate security of mind. That's what I call it. Blind belief leading to an illegitimate security of mind. So here are the hypotheses that I would like us to accept or to proceed in accordance with. All which exists can be known and will be known. And we inwardly infer, do we not, that to believe anything else, we tend to do that. Well, I mean, that's quite a radical statement. All that exists can be known or will be known. I'm not introducing the time factor here, okay? I'm just saying that all that presently exists is, I call it an infinitesimal, and I call it an infinitesimalizing infinitesimal, as there's no specific quantity, that it is so small compared to what could be, that it definitely can be known and will be known by the universal logos who has created it by its own perception. But don't let me get on to the third ray. This is about the fifth ray. So I do believe that this is the case, and I said believe all which exists can be known and will be known. And I think it's a very healthy thing for esotericists to think, because we infer, do we not, that to believe anything else than this is to impose one's own limitations of consciousness on the limitless potential of spirit. And that cannot be allowed if we are to avoid entering a new dark age. Now it sounds like my familiar theme, the new dark age. You know, this is my kick in the pants speech, you know that. But I should be, you know, doing like this. Anyway, from the fifth ray perspective, this is the worst thing that can happen to the present human condition. It is anti-illuminative, this new dark age. Now, you know, I mean, everyone's optimistic, everybody thinks everything wonderful. I mean, I'm a realist, you know, when it comes to these things. There's the good and the bad, and I think that the masters were realists too. You know how they, you know, what DK said during the Second World War about, you know, certain idealists and pacifists and all the rest who were just basically letting it all happen without putting up any kind of fight, you know. And what did he say to his disciples? He said, see that you battle. Do you remember that line? See that you battle, he actually said. I could agree with that. So anyway, DK warns us that we, humanity, could be, these are the quote, reinitiated into the earth and forced to turn our backs upon the dawning light. He uses the word there, but I put in our. Humanity could be reinitiated into the earth and forced to turn their backs upon the dawning light. So why does he write this in the Taurus chapter? I mean, are we past the danger because we emerged from World War II and everything's fine now? You know, I'm very wary about this, and I think it requires realism about the forces of evil, even though there is no absolute evil. There's no absolute evil, there's relative evil. But it requires realism. We can't just emphasize one side and not the other. We know that love conquers all. We know that love overcomes all. We do. But even the Christ had a problem with certain forces which just weren't going to accept what he was giving. So if he could not overcome them with love entirely at that moment, then we also have to be a little bit cautious and use our intelligence and our will as well. So it is for this reason of the danger, when the light is snuffed out and the illumination of the mind is disrespected and the possibilities of humanity's wonder are disregarded, that we have to be cautious. So it is for this reason that I believe people of our type, I don't want to generalize too much, but I want to generalize in some sense, people of our type must become warriors of light. He said, see that you battle, warriors of light. We are on the ray, many of us, of the light bearers, the light-bearing influence, the ray of light-bearing influence, warriors of light. And for this reason, I as you know, last time inaugurated the Esoteric Defense League, meant to contribute to the great defending wall, as he describes it, of steel, unshatterable and immovable between humanity and the forces of evil, which the hierarchy has erected. Now, this is not us. They have erected this wall of unshatterable steel between humanity and the forces of evil, the great defending wall. And so, you know, are they talking in terms of the inevitable, immediate overcoming of these forces by optimistic humanity? They are not. They are terribly realistic. And we have to be realistic too, without losing our optimism and our belief in the essential power of love as the most important thing, the most irresistible thing in the whole world. We know it is, at the same time, the realism of what we're up against, even though they are brothers in the larger sense. So at the present time then, we seem to have two options, one of which would be to finish this talk on time. Either to believe as those in the past have believed and refuse to attempt to know that which lies behind and within the hall of ignorance. See, in other words, many human beings are laboring in the hall of ignorance. It doesn't mean they don't have a brain. It doesn't mean they don't have a mind. It doesn't mean they're not intelligent. It just means that they perceive the sensory world and can operate intelligently in there and have no idea that there's a higher pair of opposites and an inner subjective reality. So we could just hang out there in the hall of ignorance, and we could simply accept the testimony of the hall of ignorance and the non-existence of the higher pairs of opposites, which comes into focus in the second tier of egoic petals. We could go that way, which many people would have us go. When I look, I get very angry. I'm not supposed to get angry, but I was just seeing there was a lady in Egypt who wanted to deny all the women's rights that have been accumulated thus far. Just the other day, just wipe them out. I get a little bit incensed about that, actually. And it's such a danger, you know, but that's happening also in Israel, you know, among the Orthodox groups, and who knows, maybe even our country, the same thing. These things are being reattempted, and people with utter sincerity and belief and sternness and all those marvelous six-ray virtues are wanting to do that, to wipe out our gains, you know, the gains of the last 500 years. So, you know, they want us to go that way. Okay, we could go that way. That's one option. Or to be self-reliant and determined to know that which lesser consciousnesses consider impossible or forbidden. That is the audacity, you know, of the will to know. We could go that way too. And this would be the Buddha way, as he insisted on self-reliance and the powers of the mind to penetrate illusion. He says, rely upon yourself, do it yourself, you have everything you need inside yourself. So what are we supposed to do? Give up to these limited points of view? Unacceptable, isn't it? So really, there is no forbidden knowledge. Everything depends on how knowledge is used. In many respects, there is no difference between what the members of the Great White Brotherhood know and the members of the Black Lodge know. It's just how they use it, what their motives. That's the difference. You have to know everything. Look, you think God doesn't know what the Black Lodge knows? If, like, it's forbidden knowledge, God doesn't know that? You know, the greater sphere knows everything. It's just how you use it. So anyway, we are moving from the six-ray age of Pisces, an age of belief, to Aquarius, age of knowledge. And it's a fifth-ray age. The seventh ray accompanies it on another cycle, but the constellation Aquarius transmits the fifth ray. It's going to be a very scientific age. So, and even the last, ever since 1425, which is about 600 years ago, remember, it's the age of Pisces, Virgo. So Virgo is a very mental sign, and that's why we had a lot of the concentration of the mind very, very strong in the last 600 years. We have a good basis to start going into the higher fifth ray, which Aquarius will offer. Well, anyway, there's something, you know, we call it the repression of the sublime. There's this instinctual thing in us that doesn't want to know, does not want to stand the strain of knowing, which DK said you can stand if you are sufficiently pure in heart and loving, you can stand the strain of knowing. But there's this thing in us that's lunar, you know, when the light is too much, we want to withdraw from that thing. We have to overcome that so we really start to love the light, love the solar light, and that's going to take a great educational enterprise. DK says that harmlessness, it's the attitude, it says harmlessness is the, it's the attitude of the individual, say it is the something of the individual who realizes, the attitude of the individual who realizes himself to be everywhere, who lives consciously as a soul, whose nature is love, whose method is inclusiveness, and for whom all things are alike, in that they veil and hide the light and are but externalizations of the one infinite being. It's the life expression of the man who knows himself to be everywhere, and then it goes on. This is identification. This is what harmlessness is based on. This is the penetration by the consciousness into a field of light sublime where we are all revealed as aspects of each other. This is a transfigured attitude. This is possible. So many people, you know, they're in mass consciousness, they don't believe it's possible. We have to stand up in a way and prove through ourselves that it is possible. And that's my main point for the rest of these 6 pages, that we have to become knowers. I could just end right there. We have to become knowers. We've been given enough, like DK says, more than you can ever assimilate. We have meditated, we have studied, we have had higher experiences, we have an endless light within us, we have the support of the solar angel, we have the great 5th ray and 7th ray working within us generically, and do we use what we have been given? And do we know what we could know? And do we focus our luminous soul-infused minds on a good day strongly enough so that we can really penetrate into the next level of the unknown? And do we care enough to really know, and not just believe, so that we can become useful to the hierarchy as beacons of light, as true knowers, in an age when ignorance and glamour are just going to be swirling all around us and people are going to believe all kinds of crazy things, and the ageless wisdom will stand like a guardian of the truth. So, will we become knowers? That's the idea. The last sentence. We should intensify our level of knowing by whatever means, and we won't have immediate results necessarily, but if we have the will to know, which is immersed within the field of the will to love, leading to the realization of reality in the sublime light, through the will to be, then we will emerge into an entirely different state of consciousness of which we are capable, but we're not capable of merging just by wishing to emerge. There's a discipline, there's a practice, there's rigorous meditation and study, there is the heightening of the point of tension to such a degree that we may not have even conceived of its possibility yet. I would say, if we all heighten our point of tension, intensify our point of tension, to the place where we can really begin to penetrate, like DK said, at the right point of tension, you can do in a few hours what might take years. He said that. So if we can really take the 5th ray seriously and the great light from the cosmic mental plane seriously, and we can intensify our point of tension and become true knowers, well, you know something at least. We're not going to become like the planetary logos, we're not going to become like the Christ, but we can become like a soul, and we can step inside our own causal body one day and perceive as if from the causal body, perceive on occasions as if within the illumination of the spiritual triad and even the monad. If we can do that, then maybe we can be useful. So in you and me are both the knower and the believer. Both are necessary. But when it comes to approaching the knowledge of the ageless wisdom, that which Master DK does teach and does spread, let it be the knower in us that wins the day. So, as he said, work, my brothers. Okay, thank you.